My wife and I had been looking for a good place to live for a long time and finally found a house in a quiet suburb. The move went smoothly and we began to settle in. The neighbors seemed friendly, all but one. The man who lived across the street rarely left the house and never said hello. He was lonely and did not socialize with the other tenants. We didn't pay him any attention at first. The house was comfortable and the neighborhood was quiet. But soon strange things began to happen. One night I heard sounds outside the window. Getting out of bed, I went to the window and saw a neighbor standing on the porch, looking directly at our house. It struck me as odd, but I figured he was just awake. A few weeks went by, and these nighttime sightings happened again. It seemed as if the neighbor was watching us. One day, coming home from work late at night, I noticed that his windows were lit up and shadows flickered in them. I came closer and saw that the neighbor was looking at something through binoculars. This gave me a sense of unease. The next day I told my wife about my observations, but she laughed and said it was just a coincidence. However, I decided that I should be more careful. I tried not to leave the windows open in the evenings and check the locks on the doors more often. But I kept getting the feeling that we were being watched. One evening, my wife found someone rummaging through our garbage cans. I went outside and saw a neighbor hastily hiding in his house. This made me even more suspicious. I decided I had to talk to him and find out what was going on. The next day, I went to his house and knocked on the door, but no one answered. I noticed someone watching behind the curtains, but the door was never opened. A few days passed, and one day, when I was coming home, I found the door to the house ajar. It was dark inside. I called quietly to my wife, but she did not answer. When I turned on the light, I saw that things were scattered, and there were muddy paths leading to the second floor. My heart beat faster. I went upstairs and saw my wife tied up in the bedroom and our neighbor standing next to her with a knife in his hands. He started talking about how he had been watching us for a long time and knew all our secrets. I tried to calm him down and distract him while I looked for a way to save my wife. Suddenly, the neighbor swung his knife and I rushed forward to stop him. We managed to disarm him and tie him up. We did not go to the police as we thought it would cause unnecessary trouble. Instead, we took him to an abandoned building on the outskirts of town and left him there. When we got home, it took us a long time to come to our senses. My wife was terrified, and I couldn't get rid of the thought that we might have been killed. Since then, we have been more careful. Moving to another city was the best solution, and we tried to forget that terrible incident. But every time I see a lonely house or pass by a window, I can't help but think about those nights and the strange neighbor who turned our life into a nightmare. When I moved into a new apartment, I immediately noticed that my neighbor in the stairwell was behaving strangely. He was polite, but too curious. He seemed to be interested in everything that was going on in my life. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it, writing it off as a desire to get to know the new tenant. But soon, his interest became obsessive. First, he started asking a lot of questions about my work and family. Then he started showing up at places where I usually spent time, as if he was setting up our meetings on purpose. It was disturbing, but I tried to ignore it. One day I noticed someone trying to open my apartment door. The lock was slightly damaged, This alarmed me, but I decided to install additional locks and be more vigilant. A few days passed, and I started noticing small disappearances in the apartment. First, my keys went missing, then a few personal items. I began to suspect that it was my neighbor's doing, but I couldn't prove it. To catch the intruder, I decided to install a hidden camera in the hallway. The next day, watching the tape, I saw my neighbor stealthily entering my apartment using a spare key, which was obviously forged. This shocked me. I realized that I had to act, but without involving the police. I decided to set a trap for him. I said I was going away for a few days on a business trip, but I stayed in the apartment. In the evening, I turned off all the lights and waited. As I expected, after a while I heard someone quietly fiddling with the lock. A neighbor came in, thinking I wasn't home. I let him in and closed the door behind him. He was clearly unprepared for this turn of events. I got him to confess that he had followed me and stolen my stuff. He said that he had been suffering from loneliness for a long time and was trying to attract attention to himself in this way. After that incident, he and I never spoke again. I changed all the locks and installed a better security system. Despite this, the feeling of unease never left me. Every night when I went to bed, I listened to the sounds outside the door, afraid that he would come back. A few months later, I learned that the neighbor had moved out. This brought some relief, but it left a deep mark. I learned to be more cautious and not to trust people too quickly. This experience taught me that you can't always judge a person by their appearance and behavior, and sometimes something dark and dangerous can hide behind a polite smile. After my divorce, I decided to have a change of scenery and moved to a small house on the outskirts of the city. The neighborhood seemed quiet, and the neighbors seemed friendly. The only exception was the man who lived across the street. He never said hello, and always looked like he didn't like my presence. The first few weeks passed quietly. I worked on setting up the house and tried to ignore the strange neighbor, but soon strange things began to happen. One morning I found a strange note on my porch, warning me to stay away from a certain house on this street. There was no signature, so I figured it was just someone's stupid joke. A few days later, I noticed that I was being followed. Every time I left the house or came back, I felt someone's eyes on me. One evening I decided to check what was wrong, and indeed I saw a neighbor hiding behind a curtain and watching me. It was unpleasant, but I tried to ignore it. One night I woke up to a noise. Turning on the light, I found the door to the garden ajar. I was sure I had locked it before I went to bed. When I went outside, I found no one there, but I saw that the wicket was also ajar. I closed it, went back into the house, and decided to be more careful. A few days later, I heard a rustling in the garden. I took a flashlight and went to check it out. It turned out that someone had gone through the fence, leaving footprints. I examined the area carefully and found an old knife abandoned among the bushes. This made me suspicious. The next day, I tried to talk to my neighbor to see if he had seen anyone suspicious, but he refused to talk, saying only that I should stay away from his house. This behavior seemed increasingly strange to me. One night, when I heard the noise again, I decided to ambush him. I turned on all the lights in the house and sat by the window to observe. Around midnight, I noticed a neighbor come out of his house and head toward my fence. He looked nervous and was constantly looking around. As he approached my house, I stepped out to meet him. He clearly wasn't expecting this and tried to walk away, but I stopped him. Under duress, he admitted that he had been following me because he was afraid I might be related to one of the past occupants of my house. It turned out that the previous owner had been involved in criminal activity, and the neighbor thought I might be part of the story. I assured him that I had nothing to do with the past tenant and just wanted to live peacefully in the new house. The neighbor calmed down and apologized for his behavior. We never spoke again after this incident, but I could sense that he still didn't trust me completely. A few months passed, and life returned to normal. But sometimes at night, I still wake up listening to the sounds outside my window, remembering that strange night and my neighbor's behavior. There will always be something in this house that reminds me of his past, and I can only hope it doesn't come back to disturb my peace.